Thank you everyone for attending today. If you're watching us live on Facebook, hello, my name is Bumbaco. I'm an oncology dietitian. I'm presenting live from Cancer Wellness Center. This is our demo kitchen here where I get to really try to execute some of the recommendations that we make related to a cancer protective diet. This program is called Ask the Dietitian. I am your dietitian, and you get to ask me questions that I try to answer within the next 30 minutes. So I have put together a PowerPoint presentation related to our topic for the month, and whoever has registered for the program, they have access to that PowerPoint and then some additional recipes and resources that I like to include to sort of like reinforce the content from today's topic. So I'm going to share my screen and present to you this month's Ask the Dietitian. So for October, we decided that we would present all about macros, all about those macronutrients. So why did I choose macros? I think if you have heard about macros, you know that this is sort of a trend and maybe it's sort of a diet and you're wondering, should I be interested in my macros in my diet? Or maybe you haven't heard about macros. Either way, hopefully you learned a little something from me today. So as I mentioned, I'm a dietitian. I'm also board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition. That's why I get to work here at the center. And today we're going to talk about our macros. So I would like to first go over macros. What are we even talking about here? And then we're going to get to those questions that our participants submitted ahead of time. And then I'm going to offer you some additional recipes and resources that you might be interested in. So the word macros it's from Greek and it means large. And so it really is essentially our macronutrients. So what are macronutrients? They are nutrients that are found in food, and they break down after the process of digestion to provide our body with the energy that it needs. And that's expressed as a unit called calories. There are 3 macronutrients in the foods that we eat: carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Maybe you've heard of them. And the term macro means large, as I mentioned, and these nutrients are needed in relatively larger amounts than we need some other nutrients in our diet. And those are called micronutrients. So vitamins or minerals are micronutrients, and they're just as important as macronutrients, but we need them in much smaller amounts in order to function. So as I shared, we have our carbs, our protein, and our fat, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them today. So let's start first with, everyone's favorite, carbs. So carbs really are what our body needs and thrives on in terms of fuel. And it is the only source of fuel for our brain to function. It's good to know, right? So there's different types of carbs that we can eat in foods, and they include sugars and fibers and starches, and they're present in varying amounts in the foods that we eat. But here's a list of where we find essentially the carbohydrates in foods that we eat. So we find them in whole grains, in some other grains like rice and quinoa, oats, corn, millet, teff, barley. Those are just some to list. Beans and lentils also have a good percentage of carbohydrates. Starchy vegetables like potatoes and winter squash. Carbs are also found in milk and yogurt, as well as fruit, as well as in small amounts in our non-starchy vegetables, and then also in our sweeteners like table sugar and other sweeteners like honey and maple syrup. So did you know most Americans, we do not eat a lot of high fiber carbohydrates. We don't eat a lot of fiber, period. So carbs are necessary not only as a fuel source, but so essentially for overall function, for our hormones, for fuel, for activity, if we're looking to increase activity levels, but also to recover from activities that we do. And it's essential for brain function, thyroid function, digestion. These are just a few of the things that we need carbs for. So they are a good thing in our diet. They are so important for us and for us to function properly that if we don't eat enough of them, our body resorts to use what are called ketones, and they're made from fat for fuel instead. And we're going to come back to ketones at the very end of this presentation. So this is a backup plan in order to prevent starvation, right? Our body doesn't really want to use ketones for energy. So there's a lot of side effects that we encounter when we don't eat enough carbs. And maybe you've noticed this for yourself if you've ever dabbled in a low carb diet. We get headachy, we get fatigue, we notice muscle cramps, even loss of muscle when we're not eating enough carbohydrates. So they are a precious macronutrient. Let's move on next to fat. So fat is the most calorie-rich macronutrient. Did you know that? It breaks down into fatty acids, and it also is a source of energy for our body. Fat provides major satisfaction to meals, and you may have noticed that as well. If you eat a fatty meal, you might feel so full and so satisfied. It's a good thing. Dietary fat also provides the body with essential fatty acids, so we need to eat them. Our body cannot manufacture them. And there's also structural compounds in dietary fats that our body can't make and can only obtain from food, right? So fats are needed to make hormones, and they also support healthy growth of our skin and our hair. We also need fat to absorb our fat-soluble vitamins, and that includes vitamins A, D, E, and K. Fat is found in oils, and there's a wide list of oils that you can consume, but also butter, lard, shortening, full fat, as well as reduced fat dairy. We have fat in eggs, in meat, poultry, fish, nuts and seeds, and avocado. Most Americans do not eat enough omega-3 fats. Have you heard about them? We should probably do an Ask the Dietitian about them. So omega-3 fats are a group of polyunsaturated fats that exert many, many healthful properties, starting with anti-inflammatory effects. They're found highest in fatty fish, and then there's a different type of omega-3 that is called ALA, and that's found in vegetable oils as well as flaxseed. And our last beloved macronutrient is protein. So protein is essential to many of the processes in our body. It provides structure to our tissue. So tissues like cell membranes, organs, muscle, hair, skin, nails, bones, tendons, ligaments, and blood plasma. We need to make sure we're eating enough protein. Proteins are involved in metabolic, hormonal, and enzyme systems, and they also help to maintain the acid-base balance in our body. It's found highest in meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and soy foods. Did you know most Americans eat plenty of protein? We probably overconsume protein, just like every other macronutrient. We overconsume them. But experts are finding we're not eating plenty of plant protein. So there might be a great opportunity here to enjoy some high-quality plant proteins. So the bottom line that I want to share about macronutrients, that they are all essential. No one is better than the other. And we all need to eat the right amounts to support our health. Those right amounts are going to depend on you, and a dietitian can help you decide just what that looks like. And a full assessment is required in order to do that. Okay, we do have some general guidelines. However, I think the more specific you can receive your nutrition recommendations from a professional like a dietitian, the better that is for you. Not all choices within each of the macronutrients are created equal. So let me give you a few examples. Oats compared to a sugary breakfast cereal, olive oil compared to butter, or something like salmon compared to a hot dog. I think you all know the choices on the left side of this list of the two is preferred because they're nutrient dense and they offer much more than just the macronutrient that they're contained in. And they also tend to be less processed. And that's a theme that I'm going to present to you today as well. Keep in mind, we eat food, right? Not nutrients. Like every food we eat is a mix of things, right? Micronutrients, macronutrients, it's a combination. And so I don't want you to get confused by the information I'm presenting today, but just take a step back and think about the overall picture of what is recommended for healthful eating, especially in a cancer protective diet. And I'll remind you of that as we go along. So let's get to those great questions that were asked. It seems to be a focus on carbohydrates, and I'm not surprised. Okay, so how many carbs should we eat in a day and what type? How to best balance carbs and when it's a significant percentage of my diet. Please let me know if I should limit my daily intake of these carbs and how much to eat daily. How do macros affect the production of platelets and monocytes? What is the recommended ratio of macros to gain weight? Does drinking this amount of water affect this? If so, how? And then wanting to know how to eat all and how that might help me stay healthy with CLL. And then lastly, looking into keto. Ooh, fun. We're gonna have fun with that one. Okay, so the first question, how many carbs should we eat in a day and which type is best? So we have to start first with knowing how many calories you require. And that's again where a dietitian can help. There are some online calculators if you're interested to explore that for yourself. And it's going to use basically the equation that most dietitians would use. And we base calorie requirements on your age, your gender, your body size, your activity level, and then sometimes other medical conditions might be included. Now, what we know is we're starting out with that level of calories. Then we want to divide those calories up according to recommended ranges for the macronutrients. And that's going to give us balance. That's going to give us adequacy in terms of receiving all of the nutrition that our body needs to function optimally. So for carbohydrates, we have this range. And the experts say that the amount of carbs in our diet can range from as low as 45% of the calories from carbohydrate up to 65% of the calories from carbohydrates. So there's a lot of math involved here. And again, that's where a dietitian can help. But let's just say we split the difference here almost and do about 50 calories of our carbs, and we're eating a 1,600 calorie diet, right? The foods that we eat is called our diet. So we would take half of those calories, right? And that's 800 calories from carbohydrate. And what we know is that every gram of carb provides 4 calories. And then we have to do the math further. We're going to divide that 800 by 4. And so that means in a day, we are afforded 200 grams of carbohydrate. And that's how we would give you those recommendations. It's really confusing, I think. So this is why, again, a dietitian can help. Now you can take those 200 grams and you can literally count them, right? If you have labels or if you have access to a nutrient analysis book or looking online, you can count the grams of carbohydrate per day. Or you can even think about counting the servings of carbs per day. And generally speaking, and we often use this for people with blood sugar concerns or conditions like diabetes, we might recommend that they think about the servings of carbs per day. And each serving, it's all relative. Each serving is going to equal 15 grams of carbohydrate. So then for this 200 grams, that would mean 13 servings per day of carbohydrate. Now that sounds like a lot, but you would be surprised how quickly it adds up. So here's what a serving essentially is the equivalent of a small piece of fruit. Now, I will say most of the fruit we have in the grocery store is probably like 1.5 servings. It's relatively large because that's how Americans like to eat, right? So a small piece of fruit will be 15 grams of carbohydrate. The fruit that we have in the store might be 20, 25. It's going to be a little bit more. It might even be 30. A half a cup of cooked whole grains or starchy vegetables is the equivalent of a serving. A small tortilla, half an English muffin, a cup of fruit, a cup of milk, the list goes on. And that's again where a dietitian can help. Now, what I would advise is that this amount of carbohydrates per day to evenly distribute it, right? You wouldn't want all 13 servings for dinner. We're going to try and divide that up evenly across the day. And that's how you can achieve balance. So a typical day of carbs would sort of look like this: a cup of oats, a piece of fruit, a cup of milk or an alternative to milk, a snack of crackers, lunch, maybe you're having a sandwich and the bread is where you're getting the carbs, and then maybe you're having another nice piece of fruit. A snack could be your popcorn. Dinner might be your whole grain, like a cup of rice. And then we even get to have some carbs for dessert. Look at that. Now, these are just the carbs. You're going to balance out your meals and snacks with other macronutrients like protein and fats, right? So for example, for dinner, it's the brown rice with something like salmon, right? And prepared with some olive oil. And now you have touched all your macronutrients. Hopefully I'm explaining that in a way that makes sense. So which carbs are best? So no matter what the macro is, minimally processed is the best, right? That's what we prefer. When we have less processed foods, then we're retaining more of the nutrition. We're retaining more of the fiber. And this is what turns out to be associated with reduced risk for disease, including most cancer types. So we want to emphasize more of the whole grains, more of the starchy vegetables, more fresh fruit, more milk, and more yogurt without the added sugars, because when we add the sugar, then it becomes extra processed, right? And then we're going to minimize those refined starches, right? Like white rice or corn chips, dried and sweetened fruit, sweetened milk alternatives, and sweet yogurt. We want to consume less of them because now we're adding more calories and from added sources like sugars and extra fats. And we're also adding sodium, and those things in excess are not advised in terms of a balanced, healthful diet. This is a good rule of thumb that I wish I had come up with myself, but I believe our friends at Harvard developed this concept of finding whole grains that are adequate amounts of fiber so that you know it's less processed. And they call it the 10-to-1 rule. So for every 10 grams of carbohydrate that's in your food choice, we want to aim to have at least, if not more than at least 1 gram of fiber in that same serving. So here's a food label, and this is a good example here. So we're going to look at carbs, total carbs, and dietary fiber. So what I see here in this 1 cup serving, I see 21 grams of total carbs, and I see 3 grams of fiber. Bingo. This is less processed. I'm not sure what this food is, but in this 1 cup, we're getting 3 grams of fiber, which is a pretty good amount. So this would kind of check out as being an acceptable choice, right? It might be a helpful rule for you to apply. We're going to move on to the next question. How to best balance when carbs are a significant part of my diet? And then if that should be limited, and by how much? Good question. So carbs, how much is really too much? Now, keep in mind, no matter what the macro is, if you're overeating anything, that's not what the experts advise for us. That's going to essentially lead to weight gain over the course of a long period of time. Keep in mind that what we call the acceptable macronutrient distribution range allows us to plan and enjoy macros according to our health needs and preferences. So for example, you remember for carbs, I talked about that range of 45 up to 65%. So maybe if you find you were someone who is tending to enjoy more carbohydrates as part of your diet, you can skew up to that 65% of carbs from calories. And I would say that that's about the cutoff for you, because then we want to make sure you're eating enough protein and enough fats to achieve that balance for optimal health, right? And again, this is where a dietitian can help. This helps ensure that you're consuming adequate amounts of protein and fat, right? So that you achieve optimal health. So what if we're mostly plant-based and eating a lot of carbohydrates? Because that's what happens if we're mostly plant-based. If we're vegetarian, we're eating a lot of carbohydrate-based foods, right? Which is actually a great thing. So we want to make sure if we're doing that, we're also incorporating sources of protein and fat when we're eating. So I would say let's talk about protein especially. And so we would talk then about recommended minimum amount. So this is a good starting point. If this 5.5 to 6 ounces per day is going to give you the amount of protein that you require for your health. And this is a general recommendation. So each of the choices listed on the slide there, they count as an ounce. Okay, so you get to kind of pick and choose and decide which one of these you're going to have for yourself in order to make sure you're not under consuming protein and that you're eating enough. So the bottom line about our carbs, eating a higher proportion from calories is totally acceptable, right? We just want to know what that number might look like. Aiming to eat to satisfy hunger and enjoying minimally processed carbs, such as intact whole grains, fresh fruit, and starchy vegetables, that's what's ideal, right? That's the most cancer protective you could be. And then including a balance with healthy fats and proteins at your meals. And maybe you've seen something like this. This is something in most of my presentations, I recommend following a template like this. And there's a lot of different versions of this template. But you'll see the way that they divide the plate up is that it is mostly carbohydrates actually on this plate, but then there's some fat involved. There's some protein on the plate as well, right? And it's ensuring that you're eating each of those in ways that are going to make sure that you're eating adequately, again, for your health. And you see, there's always that glass of milk on the side, right? No, we have a lot of alternatives to dairy. And there certainly are some that are better than others. And again, that's where a dietitian can help. So we're going to move on now. So what is the recommended ratio of macros to gain weight? And does drinking that amount of water affect that weight gain, regardless of the macros that you're eating? So the distribution of macros remain the same. So really, when we're trying to manage weight, whether it's to gain or to lose, it comes down to calories, right? So that calorie requirement is the starting point always, right? And then you can decide how you're going to distribute those calories across your macronutrients. To gain weight, we're going to aim to eat higher calorie foods more consistently. You may wish to skew a little bit higher in that protein range, right? So let's just say you're deciding to eat half of your calories from carbohydrates, and maybe you're going to go up to 20% of your calories from protein, because you know that the protein is really important as you're gaining weight, so that you gain weight from muscle, right? Because that's what we're looking to do. And so that's just an example there of how you can distribute your macros accordingly. We need a little bit more protein if we're looking to build muscle. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So what about water? How does that influence any weight gain? Well, so drinking a high amount of water, and I do consider 80 to 96 ounces a high amount. It depends on your body size, but that does sound like a lot. This shouldn't affect weight gain unless, in my opinion, it competes with your appetite, because you could feel so full on water, right? And so maybe that might affect your ability to eat this high calorie diet that would otherwise be advised. If you do enjoy more protein in your diet, it is advised that you compensate for that, because protein, when we end up breaking it down in our body, it does require a little extra fluid in order to process and excrete it. So we need to make sure we're eating, when we're eating more protein or a high protein diet, that we're drinking adequate amounts of water as well. Next question, how do macros affect the production of platelets and monocytes? So we don't have any specific research that has really given us an answer to this question, because they really haven't looked into it. I wish they have, but I think it's because in theory, they just don't think that the macros matter in order to build blood cells. What we do know is that often the treatment or the disease itself is really to blame, and that's what it's faulty. So no matter how much nutrition is there, it's just not able to make those cells because the mechanism is broken. So then the role of nutrition is really then to support the body in its efforts to build and reproduce new cells. But the concept of eating more of something isn't going to make more cells, right? It's just really about having enough. And that's where, again, working with a dietitian, just to make sure you're eating enough, period, right? To make sure that your body can function the way it needs to. So a basic and general rule of thumb is to eat enough calories and then have those balanced macronutrients. Next question, how do they all help stay healthy with CLL? I think that's a great question. Now, keep in mind a total diet pattern matters. So generally, if you have CLL, and maybe if you're on active treatment or recovering from treatment with CLL, we want you to maintain your weight, because that's predictive of outcomes. That means your body is capable of supporting its immune function, right? And to be able to heal and recover from any treatment that you might have received, if you received treatment. Maintaining muscle mass is recommended regardless of the type of therapy that you might have been in, or if you're in watchful waiting or your post-treatment. We do find that individuals with a malignancy tend to lose muscle mass. It's just sort of a metabolic aberration that occurs. And so how do we make sure you do not lose muscle? Because that's detrimental to the body's function, right? So this tends to require more protein in the diet, and that needs to be carefully planned, again, with a dietitian. So you're not overdoing it, but you're just eating the right amount and actually using your muscles, right? So all the protein in the world in your diet isn't going to help you build muscle. You have to actually use them, right, in order to retain that muscle. So you may wish to skew a little bit higher in general than the normal for the amount of protein that you require, meaning to say before diagnosis, and then post-treatment, after healing and recovery, your protein needs sort of go back down to baseline, but they are higher temporarily when you're on active treatment. And we know where we get protein, right? I'll remind you all. So eggs, dairy, fish, poultry, but beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds are great options as well. So the bottom line is to think about food as giving your body the fuel it needs so that it can function optimally. Nutrients are the substances in food that provide nourishment and support growth. So this combination of consuming foods that are minimally processed, because those are cancer protective, and then also eating enough to support your body, right? Maintain weight, maintain muscle, and distributing your macros accordingly. This is our last question, so thank you for staying with me. I'm thinking about doing keto. Well, I am so glad this question was asked. Now, this is a nice little stir fry, but the sauce, in addition to the stir fry, is what makes it keto. So this is like a chicken and broccoli stir fry that you see on the image there. But the sauce that accompanies it, I think is like, it calls for like 3/4 cup of mayonnaise. So that's what helps it break into the keto territory. And I probably could do a whole Ask the Dietitian on keto. So maybe we'll think about that in the future. But just quickly an overview of keto, there's a lot of different variations. So it really depends who you ask. But technically the variations that are most common are the classic keto, the modified Atkins. There's also a low glycemic version of keto that incorporates intermittent fasting as well. Lots of different areas to explore here. So this is a modified keto. And so what I hope you see on the plate here is the significant amount of fat that is included in planning out the diet. Now look at that carb. Remember, the acceptable macronutrient range was as low as 45%. That experts don't really want us to go lower than 45, but in this particular keto diet, it's 6% of calories. So significantly less carbohydrates. But I also want you to notice how much less protein there is as well. So only 12% of calories from protein in this modified keto diet. That's confusing to a lot of people because they assume that protein isn't restricted on a keto diet, but technically it is. We have to make sure you don't overconsume protein. And that's where we get a little concerned, because many of the people I work with, we want to actually consume adequate amounts of protein, and their needs may be higher at certain times. So to go this low in protein may be a little concerning. Now, if you go keto, it's more than just the diet, right? A true keto diet will require you to monitor your ketone levels, not only in the urine, but eventually as you keto adapt, you will monitor your blood levels of ketones. Very interesting. You should be monitored for blood work. You need to start with baseline blood work and then be monitored throughout. Supplements, electrolytes, and hydration are also very important. They need to be monitored as you initiate the diet. Activity levels are also a key component of this. So monitoring ketosis is important. You can't just sort of assume you're in ketosis. If you want to have the true effect of a keto diet, you have to be in ketosis. Not everyone is able to achieve that in the amounts that you might think. So it gets really tricky. And I think the only way to guarantee that you're in ketosis or keto adapted, as we call it, is to know what your levels are. So I would say bottom line is to make sure you speak with a healthcare provider first that you trust. So these are some additional meals that are keto friendly, but of course, there's the addition of creams and cheese and butter. Like for example, on the cheeseburger at the bottom, they put butter on top of that. So again, it's meals that you might be familiar with. Like there's zoodles here, but there's this addition, especially in the cooking prep, of fat. So whether it be oils or cheese or cream cheese, they're adding the extra fat onto it, and in larger amounts than you might assume. So a little background about keto: it was developed back in the 1921 by this physician because he had the observation that his children were seizure-free when they were accidentally on a keto diet. So he dug deeper and really gave rise to what the ketogenic diet is for, and that's for a treatment for pediatric epilepsy, but especially those with drug-resistant epilepsy, because we know that's the mainstay of treatment is to be on a prescription for their epilepsy. It may require up to 3 months before you become fat adapted or keto adapted. So we have to make sure that you get to that point, right? So 3 months is a long time, in my opinion. It means when you're at this level that you're actually using the fat that you're eating in an efficient and effective way. Otherwise, there could be adverse outcomes, right? You're not using that fat in the way you're intending to use it, and you're just accumulating that extra fat in your body. So some side effects, these are keto bombs. It's basically cream cheese with a little bit of fruit. Side effects of initiating the keto diet is certainly the keto flu. And it's really because of the diuresis effect of going on keto initially. And so there's some dehydration, but also people complain of nausea, vomiting, headache, fatigue, dizziness, insomnia, reduced ability to exercise, and then also constipation initially, and then long-term constipation is a concern because there's not a lot of fiber in the diet, right? We also see sometimes the risk for hepatic steatosis, hypoproteinemia, hypocitrulluria, hypercalciuria. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing that, as well as kidney stones. So if you have a predisposition for kidney stones, you may want to reconsider this. And then certainly because you're really drastically reducing food groups from the carbohydrate choices, you may become deficient in vitamins and minerals. In theory, it may increase the risk for heart disease, especially if you do not become keto adapted. You may lose muscle if you're rapidly losing weight, and that's inevitable. Anytime we lose weight, we lose every single part of our body's composition. So we may not want to lose that muscle rapidly. It can lead to cognitive decline. Remember, our brains really like carbs, and our brains, that's the only fuel source for our brain. And then osteoporosis, of course, and it is difficult to sustain. That's why there's a lot of interest in this, but the research is not quite there yet, especially in oncology. And that's because when they try to recruit people to do this keto diet, they can't stick with it. They have a very difficult time. So it's something to think about as well. There are absolute contraindications to going on a keto diet. And so that would include pancreatitis, liver failure, disorders of fat metabolism, carnitine deficiencies, type 1 diabetes, or someone who's taking insulin or oral hypoglycemic agents, cardiac arrhythmias, if you had a recent stroke or MI, or an infection, an active infection. So that's something to think about as well. And so you definitely would want to speak with a physician first before you go on keto, if any of these apply to you. That's some guacamole, which is a keto friendly because they add a lot of avocado oil to this guacamole. So bottom line on keto, if you're thinking about pursuing this, I would first ask, is it safe for you? Can I sustain this? What will the long-term outcome be if I do decide to do this? I think bottom line, discuss this with your healthcare provider. If you do decide to pursue a keto diet, think about consulting with your friendly dietitian because he or she can advise you appropriately. And that's a little matzo ball soup, so great on a day like today. And they make it using almond flour. So lots of creativity in some of these recipes. So to wrap up, here are some resources that I think you might find helpful. The National Agricultural Library has some great content all about nutrition on that link there. And you'll see you can dive deeper into learning about each of the macros as well. I always like to recommend AICR, the Foods That Fight Cancer. And for the individual that asked questions about CLL, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has this great website. It's called Pearl Point. And the link is there, and tons of resources right on their website that you might find helpful. And really, I think it applies to almost anyone with a malignancy, not just leukemia or lymphoma. I wanted to share some recipes that I thought balanced the macros well. And so I'm going to send these out to those of you who registered. Some apple nachos. It's great for like football season. Maybe we'll take the marshmallows off the top of that and sprinkle some walnuts on top, but we can talk about that later. A little sheet pan is always great that's like a great way to describe macros, right? The salmon is your protein and a little bit of fat. Your vegetables, and if you included some starchy vegetables, would be some carbohydrates, right? And then you're going to prepare this with a little healthy oil on top as well. And then you can put this over brown rice or quinoa, and now you really develop this balanced plate. And then, of course, some hummus. You're blending beans with oil, right? So you're getting a great distribution of your macros there. So our next Ask the Dietitian, this is not confirmed, but tentative. So we're going to meet November 3rd. the first Friday of the month from 1 to 1:30. And our tentative topic will be healthy eating during the holidays. We are in full swing, right? So I'm going to stop my share there. And I thank everyone who stayed with me for a little extra time today.